All right, we got Brett Banfe back here for round two. Right in the middle of the Copa v. Wright trial, day 4, and all the exciting things and goings on in the industry right now. So, Brett, how you doing, man? Glad to see you again.
Thanks. It's so great to be back. And yeah, I just wanted to let you know that my family loved your last segment with me. I was in Mexico, now I'm back in Colorado. But both my mother and father were with me in Mexico. They ended up watching that the next day. And so yeah, I wanted to thank you again for a really great session last time.
You're welcome. I had to listen to it like 3 times because it was so dense. I learned so much. So thank you.
My
It was
pleasure.
educational for me. Yeah, and
Likewise.
and I'm open. I want to hear more about what's on your mind. We got a lot of things happening right now. We got the trial going on. We
Yeah.
got the titan of blockchain that I'm going to be having on here soon, Mr. Calvin Ayre. What's going on with the BSV Association, the nuance. I mean, what's on your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And you referenced that phrase, the Titan of blockchain. Of course, that you're talking about Calvin Ayre, who will be on your show. I was wondering if he had already recorded or if he was coming on after me, but I'm really excited to check that segment out. But yeah, there's a lot of parallels between Calvin's vision for blockchain, specifically enterprise data, and how it relates to the industry as we continue to evolve in a Web3 world. There's some really descriptions for Web 1, Web 2, Web 3 that are fairly easy to break down. Where Web 1 was where you were just seeing some information that was posted online, maybe the business hours of a local business, etc. But it was pretty much just cut and dried. This is the information that's available. You had the emergence of platforms that allowed you to log in to create your own content, and that was really kind of the introduction. PHP development. This was kind of like in the mid '90s to late '90s. Even really some of the original platforms like Dr. Wright talks about all the time. That there was before the internet was a cohesive kind of world wide web, which it eventually evolved into. There were different segmented versions of the net, and for example, AOL, stuff like that. But you could really you could get into those platforms to share some of your own content, share some of your own ideas. Live journal, some of that type of stuff. And that was really the introduction of Web 2, where you're not just reading the information, but you're reading and writing that information as well. And uh and then now with the emergence of Web 3, it's also about authorization, authenticity of data. Now we have the introduction of AI, and with your description of Calvin Ayre as being a titan of blockchain, in a way, it's really a bigger than that, a titan of data, enterprise data, and really seeing the necessity for, as we shift into this new role where people are able to draw on the resources of these chat GPTs and things like that. There will need to be some determinations of provenance of this data, because as of right now, this data is really being scraped from that Web 2 model. The Web 2 model is that, yes, you are allowed to read and write the data, but that data ultimately gets filtered back and now is owned by a centralized platform that sometimes has a ulterior motive to certain aspects about how the world events are transpiring, and maybe using that personal data to influence in various different ways. And we see that with our own world, which we have you know uh a very nice lifestyle here in the first world nations. But when you think about also the ability for these large entities not just to be being used by large tech institutions, but also worldwide, governments that maybe don't have as much protections against keeping people's data private and stuff like that. You have these emergence of a real problem that is set to hit a global stage. at the same exact time that a solution is coming along that Calvin recognizes and understands in terms of the determination of the authenticity and the provenance of that data.
So this is really getting super deep. You're identifying. It sounds like you're identifying the problem of the vulnerabilities of the data, and then the opportunity that Calvin sees in potentially building like, well, what one of the things he talked about, and I want to know more. I want to ask him about this, and I want to get your perspective. Is he claims that that he may have a global monopoly on enterprise level adoption of big data. Is that a possibility?
It's a good question. And and to answer that question, first of all, I think it's important to understand that one of the unique abilities of BSV in terms of building a scalable solution is that, imagine that you're building a race car, okay? And you're building a Formula One, and maybe you grew up racing Formula Ones and, or you grew up racing like soap boxes or, certain things that you built as a kid that, you became endeared to. Let's just say, you really loved having, like a spoiler or something, whatever it is, when if you're really committed to the art and practice of developing something that is unique, that can achieve results that are previously impossible to achieve, you learn really quickly that you have to sort of get past your own ego in terms of how you think that design should happen. So if you believe that, the perfect Formula One should look like this, etc., but some data comes along, some information comes along that shows you that there is a better solution out there. If you're truly committed to building the best product, you have the freedom to allow some of your preconceptions to fall away and to work with what is actually producing the best results. So when it comes to BSV, we know that BSV has been modeled around biological systems. And the thing with a biological system is that, no one comes along and says, this type of animal only eats this type of food, and this type of animal eats this type of food. It's sort of like in the wild, anything goes. So when it comes to building a scalable solution that uses blockchain, you have to start with the goal, the vision, what you're driving to. That's like the equivalent of building that or knowing that you're building the best Formula One possible. But then you have to be willing to experiment and say, okay, we started with this idea, but let's go back to the drawing board. Let's see how we can to test this hypothesis, etc. So when we're asking, does BSV have like the global monopoly on this data solution? I would say in the spirit of what BSV is building, if it didn't have for example, if the existing technology didn't support that vision, then it's a responsibility of the network to check its own assumptions and to make changes when necessary. So one of the examples of doing that has been that I've been privy to a little bit with within the last few months is seeing the emergence of standards across the BSV ecosystem in terms of developer relationships, developer libraries, open source tooling, so that developers can pick this technology up and run with it. Because again, if we want to say that we have a monopoly on this, we have to understand that doesn't mean me personally. And for Calvin, it doesn't mean Calvin himself has the best vision and the only vision that's possible to achieve success. Because at the end of the day, it's about creating a working environment that pulls more and more visionary people into this process to evaluate and to test these hypotheses and to say, as long as we're heading in the same direction, building something that's scalable, that can, provide enterprise level auditability, traceability, security, authentication, ownership of data, self-ownership of data, as long as we're striving towards that, then at the end of the day, that's how we went from building just, race cars to building rocket ships, right? Because we take the same principles, we move them to their next phase. So, what would blockchain look like, 20, 30, 150 years from now? I don't necessarily know, but I know that within the culture of BSV development and enterprise development for data solutions, that we are willing to push the boundaries, to test our hypotheses, and to really draw our North Star from our customers' needs, which is so important.
Fascinating. All right. So it sounds like it really is going to come from within regarding the potential, global monopoly. It's a possibility, it's really an interesting subject. Okay. So what what else is going on? I mean, have you been following along with the Copa trial? Have you been watching the trial at all? Are you allowed to talk
Yes.
about it? What do
Yeah.
you?
Loosely, very loosely, mostly on social. So one of the things that I'm doing is really a community, head of community for the BSV Association. So within that capacity, really focusing on making sure that we're getting those tools out to developers, that they understand that, when you just use the term, Bitcoin, or when you are referring to BSV, a lot of people are just thinking that this is a payments technology. And really what we were just talking about before, about the enterprise data applications, the ability, which I know is something near and dear to your heart with your involvement with Script and with your friendship with Xiaowei Liu, that this isn't just about making a payment, but it's also, the payment is like the first domino a lot of times. And also the payment is the ability to ensure that there is a reason why someone, imagine that it's the ability to secure data. Well, why would someone secure the data? Is it just because I'm a really nice guy and, I asked them to do it for me? Or can I make sure that, the way the world works is that we provide an economic incentive for that to happen? And so much that exists in the Web 2 model that we were describing before, it really meets this hurdle about not understanding how to monetize the service offerings that it provides. So what it will oftentimes provide will be things like subscription models, okay, well, you don't have the ability to just buy one, 30 seconds of the movie just to see if you like it, and if you do, you can continue to watch it, instead. Or you don't have the ability to read one article on a news site. You have to get the monthly or the yearly subscription, because there's no ability for payments to go below a certain threshold. So everything as a result gets sort of scaled up. In a way, this is almost like if you've ever put someone else's glasses on your head, and suddenly the world is being, you're seeing things that are distorted, right? Well, the inability for the payment systems of the world's transaction networks to go below these certain levels, it creates this distortion that makes everything else in the environment look off of kilter. So that's my interest and my involvement in terms of BSV, and my focus on what's going on with the trials. This is something where I didn't really know a lot about this technology. I knew a little bit about peer networks in terms of trading and file sharing, and peer networks in terms of exchange of communication and things like that. But I didn't know too much about the core concepts that are really at the heart of BSV until I learned about Dr. Wright. And the way that I found out about him was through trials. So, and these were trials that he has been involved with, in previous courts. So I know that these are massive opportunities for education, for people to learn, to step in and say, well, okay, here's a guy who is in the public limelight right now. He's involved in a civil case going on with respect to some, intellectual property that he's developed, et cetera. and, you know, asserting his case that this is my property, this is how I intended this system and the structure to be built. But at the end of the day, what's important to me is really like when you look beyond that, you know, when you actually say, okay, this guy is talking about this technology that's being built in this very specific way that has to work in this one way in order to scale to a global demand. What actually is that? What can it do? What is it capable of? And, you know, those are the things that you know, when I first started to learn about this, I have to be completely honest. I didn't know my left from my right, to use a pun there, you know, because, you know, it's really it's dense material, but you know, I was just fascinated and motivated, and this is what I want people who watch your show and who learn about maybe BSV through these trials to be infected by that same enthusiasm that I was, where, you know, we talked about it on our last show. I was someone who didn't always accept just because I said so as an answer from an authoritarian. If my teacher told me, don't worry about that, just because I said so, that's the answer, that always prompted me to go and try and look in deeper and see, well, what is actually the real reasoning? What is actually causing this? And so, yeah, so I've been loosely paying attention to what's going on in the trial, but always within the context of trying to make sure that I'm providing a resource to anyone who's learning about this technology through the trial and wanting to understand at the next layer, what is Scrypt, what are smart contract capabilities on BSV, and if I can help to answer that, then I will have achieved my purpose.
Well, so it sounds like this is an opportunity to a learning opportunity that like this is basically the way you took the last trial, one of his other trials in the past. You sat there and literally learned, you know, from him being on the global stage. And it looks like seems like that's been a lot of what's been going on the last 3 days on the stand. It's literally been like a master's class for me. I've tried to, I mean, way out of my level on most of the stuff, but I'm still enjoying trying to absorb what I can, you know, from some of the high level things he's talking about. Uh,
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, you know, sometimes I like to use this analogy is like, you know, we're talking about these very, very nuanced takes, these very specific niche takes on blockchain, you know, and blockchain is a really exciting emerging technology, you know, that provides this capability for payments and all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, it is really just this like, you know, base layer for a payments network. You know, and I just think back, like imagine in the 80s, if we had this like, you know, like crazy, you know, like vitriol and this discussion and arguments and stuff all around, you know, whether we should use this port in the computer or this port, right? But it's like, you know, I think IT departments are famously, you know, like extremely stubborn and rigid when it comes to, you know, how a information network should be structured and stuff. One of the things that's, you know, I'll comment about that I'm you know, that's coming along through social media, which I'm paying attention to, which is that, you know, you tend to know Dr. Wright. You know, after you've met him a few times, you know, like he loses this mystique to him, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like when you first you know, are in the room with him, you're like, oh
the
my God.
celebrity aspect, right?
Yes, there he is, you know. And as you become familiar with him, you just realize, oh, that's just Craig, you know. And but you know, like one of the things that these trials really remind you of is like the absolutely unbelievable credentials that he has, because like you just think like, oh yeah, that's just Craig. It's like if your neighbor is like, you know, we were talking about Formula One, if your neighbor's like a Formula One, you know, like race car driver, and you don't even remember that, but then they take you for a drive and you're like, okay, now I remember. Like, you know, this guy really, he understands this on a just completely different level than me. But yeah, looking back at his credentials and, you know, having you know, I think these, you know, these SAN certifications that he has and these you know, global audit capabilities, I mean, I think it is safe to say and fair to say that he is, you know, the most credentialed security expert on the planet. And also another thing that's kind of some of this you know, again, not to speculate or anything, but some of the information that you see on socials and things like that is just that he's been working on these types of distributed network models for, you know, several years before Bitcoin was released. And so and you know, I know that one of my favorite videos for anyone that's listening out here that wants to watch a really great video, there is the Stephen Matthews video where he's going over his time working with Craig through I think Center Bet, which was where they first met through Brittany Bits podcast. And you know, in that interview, he just talks about how, like, he has these visions for how network security needs to be structured, and that, you know, to have a single entity that is managing all of the data. You know, I'm in the US, I know you're in the US. For anyone that's not in the US, we had some incidents with breaches of data recently. I think Target, which is a retail chain, they recently had a
They had a
breach of data.
credit card hack or
Exactly.
identity. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And now you have, I think they're one of the largest companies on the whole planet, especially retail. There's probably 3-4 million different people, maybe even more, that have purchased at least one thing through a Target point of sale system. And now you have all 4 million people's data gets breached at the same time, you know, because it's not a distributed system. There's not little bits of data that's stored all over the place that if someone wants to go in and you know, extract some data, maybe if there's 4 million customer pieces of data, you have to break 4 million different files to get that data. You know, that makes it so that it's economically not and economically incentivized for anyone to hack that data. And that doesn't mean that someone couldn't. Maybe the greatest hackers in the world, they could spend a lot of time finding that my one credit card and then get the $500 that are on it, and it's not going to be worth their trouble. But it's only when you have these honeypots for the data, where it's all being maintained by the same database with the same key access codes, etc., that's when it really becomes a security vulnerability. So people like Dr. Wright that have these massive credentials, you know, that are among the most accomplished people in their fields. You know, for the other thing too that's important about Dr. Wright is that he's not you know, he's not a cookie cutter in terms of his approach, right? He is so inventive and so genius in terms of his vision that he looks around at the, you know, the tools that he's being, you know, queried about in terms of his credentials. You know, he has to do these 36-hour tests, and he has to answer all these questions, etc. He may be looking at the course that he's taking and saying, I know how to do this better. There's a better solution out there. And so it really reminds you that you know, it's what they say, that you know, that it's really inspiration and innovation comes from seeing the deficiencies in a current model, you know. And you can either do, as Buckminster Fuller said, you can either try and fight the existing model, which will drive you crazy, or you can invent a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And with what we're seeing with the emergence and development of these distributed systems, you know, they're used in part with Nakamoto consensus, but they're just really the tip of the iceberg. This would be like if, you know, comparing where blockchain is right now to where it could be 20 years from now, is like the equivalent of if Benjamin Franklin, you know, used the key to draw electricity and to prove that he can draw electricity, and then sketched out some plans for what electric might look like in the next 10-15 years, compared to now seeing what it's actually capable of when we have the world's geniuses all contributing to actually see what is actually possible by using BSV as a base layer for auditability, data integrity, and all of those things. And that's when we really reach that explosive point of growth where it's not just, and Dr. Wright, I think, really understands this, that he's not seeing himself as like the authoritarian figure on how all networks should be built. But what he is seeing is that that through building these new network models, we have the ability for the inspiration, the innovation, and the genius of the rest of humanity to come together and to help it down its path towards a more free world.
And Brett, this is a power, like one of the things that drives me about this is the talk that Craig had done. The very first, one of the first interviews was the Doko series, the very first one. It was like 10 or 15 minutes. And he says that Bitcoin takes away power. That really drove home with me. It takes away power. And then for me, I think I've derived from that, like it takes away power from the few and it gives it to the many. Is that a good analysis that it's and if so, how does it do that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it is a great analysis, and it's the long-term plan. One of the things that that it brings to mind is that you know, first of all, let's just imagine for a second a humanity that cannot lie, that everything is always brought into the public light. You know, in this type of world, you don't have things like corrupt politicians. You don't have things like backroom deals. You don't have things where, things are being worked out behind the scenes and a different light is being presented for a public. Because in a world like that, we can't help but tell the truth, right? So it would be like, I would walk up to you and see you in the morning and go, hey, just stabbed you in the back last night. How's your morning going? Like this wouldn't work. But this is part of our plight as humanity, is that we have this really brilliant capability to devise solutions. Like they say, the opposable thumb is the point at which we started to build these new tools, and the new tools gave us an advantage at cultivating or harvesting or gathering fish or gathering berries, right? And once we had them, we could make baskets, and then we could have our trip to the berry bush. We could do more berries and less trips, and we're on this pathway to this efficiency model that is just maximizing our energy, right? Because to be a human being on this planet, it's very energy intensive, so because it takes so much energy, even sleeping takes energy. Like we think of sleep, that's where we recover and we restore our energy. But like when you really think about it, like sleeping takes energy. You have to take your shoes off, you got to get in bed, it's a lot of work to do all that stuff. And so we have this creative brilliance, but we also have, there's two different worlds that oftentimes many different members of our species live in, which is how we are in private and how we are in public. And as much as we like to think that we are the exact same in private as we are in public, the reality is that that's very difficult. And it's not difficult just because it has just been made difficult for me, because I'm being tested or something like this. But it's really a process of how we develop as children, right? We start off with we don't understand the world, right? We want to make sense of it. And then but we also have this inclination to, we want to be satiated, when we are hungry as little children, we cry. We learn that very early that we can basically demand the things that we want and expect that the world give those to us. And so as a result, when you learn that you can do that, you tend to say, okay, well, I'm not getting what I want yet, but maybe if I cry a little bit louder, my mother will come and give me the bottle. And so we learn how to use this our creativity, but the first thing that we're doing is that we're using it to enrich ourselves, right? And we have to learn later that it's also we're able to use it to enrich each other, and that maybe if I spend some time enriching my community, it'll come back to benefit me in the end, right? That we have to learn those things, because in the beginning we just want what we want for ourselves. And so So I think with the development of an open public ledger, where now all of a sudden transactions can be public, right? We have to be the people who we are claiming to be in public. We now have a greater responsibility to be that in private, because now all of this information is being shared on a public ledger. So if we're saying that we don't support this and we don't support that, and then down the road it finds out that maybe some of the funding that we accepted came from some of those sources, now we have a responsibility, and we have to answer to that, and we have to do so in the public light. Now, this is the process by which we mature as not just individuals, but we use our maturation as individuals to help encourage others within our communities to mature as well. For example, a great example of this is sportsmanship. At the end of the day, there are ways to win at sports that are really out of bounds. You could put something terrible in your competitor's food. Maybe you have a food banquet, and you put something terrible, and then you win. But as Joe Paterno said, success without honor is like an unseasoned dish. It may satisfy the hunger, but it doesn't taste good. So we have this greater responsibility to each other and to ourselves, not just to be the best and to win at all costs, but to do so in a spirit of fairness that will honor the actual activity that we're competing in. If we're competing in a race and we're off, and it's a cross country race, and we're running through the woods, there's no judge out there to watch whether or not I'm behind you and I kick your foot as you're going around the corner, and that might mean that I have a greater chance of winning, but in that win, I end up disgracing the spirit in which we're competing in the first place. So when I hear Dr. Wright's explanations about, shifting taking the power away from money, what I'm seeing is that by virtue of moving the transaction records to a public ledger, it forces us to be more responsible to each other and to uphold the spirit of being a community with each other.
Sounds like nobody wants to be the guy who's kicking the Gatorade over on his other friends and throwing his tennis racket on the tennis court, right? Throw the fit. It's better to be the good sportsmanship. So that's a really good analysis about taking the power away and taking the money away and making it as because you become publicly accountable. It sounds like.
Absolutely. And we have to hold each other accountable. So, this is like, becomes like a Mexican standoff, where I'm watching you, you're watching that person's watching this person, right? We all become, and this is the concept of Dr. Wright. He repeatedly emphasizes this concept of the small world network, and being able to, they say, like, it's
That's
one
George.
thing to
That's
talk.
George Gilder. Is that George Gilder's concept?
George Gilder, yes, exactly.
Can you
Yeah,
explain that again?
sure. The small world network, and the way that I like to answer this, because when I first was studying all this stuff, like I was saying before, I didn't know left from right, so I'm just, what is a small world network? Wouldn't you want a large world network? Why small? What's so good about that? But the example that they use on just the Wikipedia page for small world network, I think, is just a telephone network, right? So if you're the first person and the only person on the telephone network, right, your telephone doesn't ring to anybody. It's useless, But as more and more phones pop up, now it becomes a denser and denser network of participants. And I like to use this example, which actually this example was first introduced to me through Dr. Wright. And I'll paraphrase it, but there was a researcher out of Boston University, and he had this experiment where he wanted to show how the process by which information traveled. So he started with a research group that was made of his students in Boston, and the goal was to send a letter to Sacramento, California. And the trick of this research was, you could only send it to someone that you knew. So maybe you don't know anyone that lives in Sacramento, but maybe you have a brother that lives in Utah. So that's a halfway towards Sacramento. So you get it towards Utah, and maybe that person knows someone that's in Nevada, and the Nevada person knows someone that's in California. So it began with just this exercise where you had to write a letter to someone you know, and then ultimately you had to have the letter arrive in Sacramento. And if it did, then you achieve success. So I think about 50% of the students achieve success at that experiment. And on average, it took 12 letters to be written before it went all the way across the country to Sacramento. And remember, half of them never even arrived in Sacramento. So Craig uses this example to showcase how, a network is formed in terms of its density, so that would be considered a not very dense network, right? Because it takes a long time, and this would be considered hops, like nowadays we think of them as hops on a virtual network, but back at the time that this was done in the 70s, I think, again, this was hops, but they're literally physically written, with pen and paper. So I believe the same experiment was later carried on in this new digital age with everybody having a Facebook friend, et cetera. And what they found was that the messages were arriving at much greater percentages, but also on average, it was taking 6 messages through a virtual network like Facebook to arrive at a end result in Sacramento. So the natural conclusion of what that was, and this is describing a small world network, right? So the original network, it's small, it's still a small world network, but it takes many hops for it to get all the way to the other end of the network, right? Whereas now what you're having is it's still going to Sacramento. So it's still a network that connects all the way, across the globe. However, it's just doing it in quicker succession. And so Dr. Wright's real innovation here in terms of his understanding of small world networks is that using the nodes as a centrifugal point for the network, but not a centrifugal point in the same way that we were talking about Target being a honeypot for this data becomes a centralized point, because it's not centralized, it's centrifugal. So the information is being pulled into it because you're putting a carrot on the end of the stick in the form of this very, very micropayment. You're saying, hey, if you suck my data up, into your little data ledger and you're counting your jelly bean counting machine, and you catalog it and you index it for me, I'll give you this tiny, tiny, tiny little carrot on the end of the stick. And so his vision is that by creating this very, very robust micropayments network, now the information, by the time it takes one hop, it's actually, according to Dr. Wright's research, it's 1.2 hops, which means that every 5 times that you send a message, it will take an additional hops. So there will be 1 out of 5 times that it'll have to have taken 2. But remember, you're competing, like the technology that this is going to eventually replace is like the Meta, the Facebook, the Twitters of the world, which these hops are it's taking 6 hops to get across the network. So what this means is that it's just a much more densely a densely centered centrifugal network. But also what we're doing is that we're leveraging economies of scale. So for example, like, we have the privilege of having a post office here in the United States. I'm sure many other places have excellent postal services, but that wasn't always the case. Back in the day, there was the Pony Express. You had to get the letters onto the backs of the horsemen, and then if they lived way out in the middle of nowhere, who the heck wants to go out there? They might just rip that letter up. Oh, I never got that one, So what you have is the problem of how does this data get out to the places where it needs to go, And so with this much more centrifugal network that the blockchain represents, just like how we now able to leverage the economies of scale and use the post office, we can send a letter anywhere, even if it's in the middle of nowhere, for 35 cents, not because any single individual mail carrier could actually carry that that letter for 35 cents is because so many people are paying 35 cents that we're able to collect all of those 35 cents or whatever it is. I think it's like 50 cents now, showing my age by talking about the stamp being 35 cents. But now we're leveraging economies of scale, and we're allowing information to travel across a network at rates that no individual could ever move it, because it just becomes economically feasible to do so, but only when you reach this critical mass of information and data, as you were talking about before. Calvin Ayre, being a titan of this industry, is the one who recognizes the real value that represents to a global economy.
Yeah, so that's a really good point you bring back up. I think before we started the show, you talked about we mentioned that data is the new oil. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Data is
Yes.
the new oil. So, and that seems to be like well, a guy like Calvin, the way I seeing, like, he's like the titan of blockchain and perhaps even data now, the way you're describing it, which I still need more education on from you, a lot more about how the data side's going to work. But seems like he could be like the next Andrew Carnegie type. Andrew Carnegie was just like a master with people. He would put all the right people together. He really didn't know that much about steel. He couldn't
Absolutely.
tell you everything about steel, but he was the steel titan. And I bet Calvin could talk a lot about this, but he may not understand all the things that or Craig knows, at that level, but he has the right people. And so, yeah, I would like you to talk a little more about that. And like also the concept that I think people would be concerned about is, well, if Calvin's there, is he going to be in charge? And is it, or is Bitcoin actually the company, or BSV? Is that actually the company itself, like the blockchain? Because that's another nuance. Like, we're all part of the same company in the way, but it's just Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so it's how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. If it's okay with you, I just said it's a great question because I wanted to leave it a good place to pause. I just have to get my my charger for my computer, and then I'll be. Yeah, that's a really great question. And one of the unique parts about this small world network is that we end up really working for each other without necessarily having the same goals or interests, because it's by virtue of the fact that, for example, I like to use this analogy of like a biosphere or a biosystem. Like you go
Before
to.
you make that analogy, Brett, let me just see if we can maybe make it a more of a real, even analogy right now for people who are not seeing what's happening. And that is, they have this new thing called the Twitter space. And I'm seeing this huge volunteer movement where all these people are volunteering and spending all this time talking on there, but they're not being paid to do that.
Absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, is that where you're going? Is that kind of an example of where you're going with? Maybe we can talk about that too. So
Sure. Yeah. And that's so for example, you have Twitter Spaces where you have all these educated people that are coming along and they're sharing their thoughts and their opinions. And on the one hand, they're sharing their thoughts and opinions because it's sort of cathartic for them, right? We oftentimes, like, we'll talk to ourselves if we're just driving, like, helps us get our ideas out there. And there's also something to be said for hearing how you sound, because sometimes an idea can exist in your head, but when you try to translate it to sharing it to someone else, of course, the first thing you want to do is make sure that they understand it how you understand it. So so you first have to put it into like a framework where they can actually see the end vision that you see. And then when you try to put it into words, that's when you realize, like, oh wow, like, I'm doing a bad job of this, or this idea isn't as good as I thought it was. Like, and when it was just living in my head rent free, it was the solution to everything. But here I am trying to explain it to the very first person that I come across, and it's like, wow, it sounds like actually it's not that great of an idea. But you don't know that until you hear it, because this is one of the things that we do when we were talking about being in public and being in private. Like, we have a responsibility to each other. And part of that responsibility is that, it's one of the things that you learn as you grow up, is like, it's, to for lack of a better word, it's the golden rule. You want to be there for others as you would have them be there for you. And so, so a lot of times we use each other as this sounding board, and that becomes, a it's the same thing with a market idea. You have an idea when you're falling asleep at night about this great idea for a new business or a product that you want to take, like onion juice. Like, nobody's doing onion juice. Like, they're doing kale juice and all of this. Nobody's doing onion juice. Let's do it. And then you get up there and you take it to market. You show up, you squeeze the onions, and market's not buying it. And so the thing is that we use that as a barometer for actually testing our ideas, but in the same way that you're using the market to test your ideas, you also are the market for someone else out there, right? And so, we can do this with more than just our business ideas or more than just our entrepreneurship. We can do this with our kind acts, like our paying attention, our being present with our friends and our neighbors, our giving them a shoulder to lean on when they need it. A lot of times people don't need advice or don't need the solution to everything, right? They just need you to be there for them so that they can, get what they have on their chest off of it. And so, the truth is that, this is it's a process of self-refinement. In fact, I think one of the phrases that I think fits really well is autopoiesis. So it's a self-organizational model. So we a good example is like, a community or a family, right? No one steps out and says like, okay, well, I'm going to be the one that only does this. You be the one that only does that, right? We sort of like work together to figure out what we're good at, and we contribute in ways that we have talents and that we're best capable of, et cetera. This is a self-organizing model, and in a way, BSV, tracing itself back to the Genesis block of Bitcoin, this is a self-organization effort, right? Because no one is sitting there saying, like, oh, we need you to come onto the network, and we need you to start hashing, and no, I don't want you hashing. I want you over here processing validation, transactions. We don't have like a conductor at the top of the orchestra that's telling everyone what to do, right? We are using our own, and this is why Craig, as a pure capitalist, sees the value of this network as being a real demonstration of the value of, like, the self-directed individual that is pursuing their own ends and their own means, but it's in their pursuit of those ends and those means that they're creating room and opportunity for others to do so as well. And the counter argument to that would be the idea that, that only the conductor knows how the orchestra is supposed to sound. So everyone has to all the time be watching their every move. Whereas how it works in an orchestra is you have the sheet music, right? The conductor is guiding it, right? But it's not solely just what the conductor is thinking at that exact moment, right? It's a blend of the rules and the effort to work together that makes the magic.
Brett, this is going to sound like a total shift. Okay, so brace yourself. You had a space on Twitter recently where you said, "Explain Bitcoin like I'm 5 years old." What was that about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a great question. The Bitcoin is very, very dense subject matter. When we're talking about Bitcoin, we were talking about, how you can use these, shorten the hops between 12, on paper to 6 on Facebook to now even a smaller hops on Bitcoin, right? These are really powerful ideas but they don't translate really well to like ordinary language and ordinary understanding, right? It's like I'm sitting at the bus stop with someone and it's not the first thing that we're going to start talking about is network topology and how many hops it takes to get to the center of the network. Although, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? Now everyone understands that. So, like the ELI5, it's a meme, it's kind of an acronym. It means explain it to me like I'm 5. It's a useful way to remind yourself that, okay, they may not know how to understand this in terms of how many hops does it take an information packet to get to the center of the network, but they may understand how many letters it would need to go through to get to Sacramento, right? Same concept, same vision, same analogy, right? But you're just explaining it in a way where actually an average person can look at that and go, I understand that, and I get the concept of a small world network. What you're doing is you're shrinking, the network is even bigger, right? You're including more and more information, but what you're doing is you're actually shrinking the density of that network so that you can get to any point from anywhere in the network with only 1 or 2 steps. And this model is used to describe, in some ways, the way that theoretical physicists imagine that hyperdimensionality works within the broader universe, right? Because, like, let's say for the sake of discussion that we have this, we're like the screen is a metaphor for the entire universe, right? And we have, galaxies over here, some other galaxies over here, some other galaxies over here. Here's our local galaxy, Earth's in there somewhere, and then there's a bunch of galaxies out here, right? We're talking about a span of, billions of light years or millions of light years away, right? And you have these 2 particles that are on these like total disparate sections of this, space. So it obviously naturally seems like to get from this one to this one, right? You have to have like this massive journey, right? This would be like what the equivalent of what Dr. Wright calls the traveling salesman problem. And, if anyone that's really paying attention, looking it up, I can explain it maybe a little bit after this, but I don't want to derail. So make sure you take a second and look up the traveling salesman problem. It's quite interesting. But anyway, so if you're just looking at this on face value, like in order to get from dimension whatever galaxy A to galaxy B, you first have to go or to galaxy Z, you first have to go through B, then C, then D, then E, then right. You have to go all the way through, right? That's one way to look at it. But the other way to look at it is, okay, we have A up here, we have Z here. We know where their locations are. So what if we fold the universe in half? Such that A and Z are now, just like if it was a piece of paper, if they're dots on a piece of paper, you fold it in half and now the dots are directly next to each other, right? So on the one hand, you have this concept of these things being very disparate and very far apart, right? But if we can identify their fulcrum point, right, then we have this place where actually we can use that to create a direct connection between the 2 various different points in space. And so one way to think about this would be like a wormhole or something like this, where something goes in one end and out the other, right? This is in a way kind of how we imagine quantum mechanics, with the ability for electron to be neither its speed nor its location can be simultaneously known, and it's simultaneously a wave and a particle, right? But you have the electron, like if its location is ever known, right, then like it doesn't really have the like for example, it might start out right here and then pop out down here, right? It doesn't necessarily travel. It's like Christmas lights, right? That are just like flickering all over the place, right? The electron is just it's just all over, and it doesn't necessarily transfer like in the way that we would think something moving does, right? It just sort of like is all over the place. Well, the same thing. You have this ability for these points in space to maybe like go in one and pop out the other, et cetera, right? We could consider that a wormhole, or you can consider it similar to that electron that is maybe starting off in this location, then moving to this location, right? What it's doing is it's bridging to a higher dimension, and it's just simply like moving in and out of a three-dimensional space, but that three-dimensional space is wrapped up in a higher like core of dimensionality. And so the reason why that relates back to blockchain, to data, to security, integrity, auditability, right, is this vision that Dr. Wright is proposing about how this network really needs to be developed in order to maximize the efficiency of the network, right? If we had the ability to, just like that electron, or just like that data point, to just hop, like, out of one location and into another, that would be very efficient if we could do it without, like, scrambling our brains too much, right? Like
Teleporting.
teleporting, right? Like, yeah, if we had the ability to just teleport, we would do that. If information had the ability to teleport, information would do that, because it's economically, it's energy efficiency. There's all kinds of reasons why it's more valuable to teleport information, or to teleport, in the case of the example,
Can't we
like
do
Star Trek.
teleport? Like, for example, I mean, what about just sending an email? Isn't that kind of like teleporting? I mean, if I send you an email right now, you're going to get it almost right away, won't
It's
you?
a great question. Yeah, because you get it temporally very, very similar, right? You get it temporally in maybe like less than a second, right? That's basically as real time as you can possibly get. But the truth is that data doesn't go directly from you to me with no intermediary, right? That data goes to your internet service provider, and then your internet service provider sends it to mine down in Denver, and then mine down in Denver sends it to here, and then it goes to Boulder, and then eventually they find my local provider. They say, which one of these computers is Brett's computer? And then they say, oh, that one is, and then, okay, route this to that computer, please. Right? That's how information packets go on that's not a small world network. That would be what Craig is describing needs to be replaced. That would be what would be described as a mesh network. And that is the model that we're talking about before, where the letter goes from Boston, but it doesn't go from Boston to Sacramento in one go. It goes here, then 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 Sacramento. The problem is that those all become attack vectors. If this information
the letter could get lost or stolen.
Yeah, it could get lost, it could get stolen, it could get copied, it could get read by a party that wasn't intended to read it. There's all these reasons why when it travels down that road, yes, it does it very quickly, but it actually isn't going instantly, right? It's not teleporting, it's following a known path. And actually the path that it follows is actually this path that that it's the internet backbone, and I believe it's called the border gateway. So you can do some research on that, because there's some information out there about how the border gateway relates to networks in general. But the reason why the border gateway protocol, I can't remember exactly, but the reason why it works is because there are a group of computers on this planet, maybe 100 or so, maybe 50. I can't remember exactly how many, but they have what's called a whitelist, like, authorization to route data. Okay, so the obviously energy is always important. You want to route data as quickly as possible from you to me, but your computer has no idea what my computer is, right? We're on different networks, we're using different systems, different ports, different all types of stuff. So instead, what your computer does is it just sends out a message to the border gateway, which is this group of 35, 100 computers, whatever it is, I don't know, but they have a full map of where all access points are, right? So again, this goes back to this honeypot of potentially dangerous material, right? Because now you're sending information into this trusted network, right? And then the network is sending it to me. It's not you that's sending it to me directly. It's you sending it to the network, which is the network is routing it to me. To use a parallel about how this relates to Bitcoin, this is like the equivalent of, instead of you, Alice, handing me a transaction, Bob, and saying, here's your money, just like I would do if I was handing you a cash bill in person, right? Instead, you're sending a message out and saying, hey, someone out there that knows where Brett is, please bring him this $5 bill, right? And those in the BTC network, that is the equivalent of the miner network, right? So that doesn't actually accomplish what Dr. Wright had originally envisioned, which is peer-to-peer electronic cash, because there's an intermediary in that point, right? It's peer to home, Raspberry Pi home node network, Greg Maxwell's fiefdom, and then from Greg Maxwell's fiefdom, it comes back down to me, right? So that makes them the center of the network, right? So the whole idea is that, we want to avoid centralization, but we're going to centralize ourselves in order to make sure that there's no centralization. You understand? You follow? So it's repurposing the same model that Dr. Wright's vision is seeking to replace. Whereas the teleportation model, where it can truly go from the end of the universe to the end of the universe, that's only possible through BSV. And I know I'm using the analogy of teleportation, but in reality, what it is for data processing is that we're in the process of replacing IPv4, which came about in the 80s, and it has very limited addressing space. I think the last IPv4 address got assigned almost 15 years ago, just a little bit after the launch of Bitcoin. So there's no space left. What you can do is you can create these submasks or something like that. So, but at the end of the day, there's no more open address space. Whereas the shift to IPv6, what it's doing is it's creating this much larger paradigm in which, this data point can actually communicate directly with this data point all the way down here, because this data point actually has an address, right? The information doesn't have to go to this local galaxy, then this one, then ours, then the next one, then the next one, then this one, right? You can just say, well, what's your address? And the data point can say, I am in the Sector 9, whatever. And yeah, that's an address. That's a real address in the IPv6 address space. And so that so the information can get communicated directly. And the real vision that Dr. Wright has is when that information gets handed directly to the recipient, the recipient now has the obligation to announce to the network that I've just received this information. So for example, in the case that you're handing me this $5 bill and it's going directly from you all the way on this side of the network to me on this side of the network, first of all, it doesn't have to travel through Greg Maxwell's fiefdom, right? It just goes directly to me. But now first of all, if you are like my best friend, let's say you're, someone I grew up with, I don't need to check if your $5 is real, because I know that we know each other too well. You would never do that for me, And if it's a small casual payment, maybe I don't care. Maybe I just leave it in and never investigate whether or not that ever, or never even broadcast it to the network. But if the reality of the world is that, as Kurt Wookert, one of our good close friends, likes to say, you need to be able to do business as easily with South Carolina as you can do with South Korea, and if you're from South Carolina, you may be comfortable accepting, the bill that comes in from, the South Carolina guy that lives down the street. But if you're doing business with someone from South Korea, you don't know this person from a hole in the wall, you're going to want to broadcast that message to the network and say, hey, everybody, this guy's trying to pay me $100. Does this look real to everybody else? And if the network sends you back an information and confirmation that looks like a real $100 bill, then you have then you can accept it. And that is the model. It's not on the sender to broadcast the message. Do you see how it's a flip in terms of who is checking with the network? In the other model, the BTC model, the sender is sending to the network and saying, please pass my message along so that the receiver receives it. Whereas here, you're handing it to me directly, and I'm the one that's sending it to the message, because I'm the one that wants to ensure that I get paid.
So BTC, you're asking for permission. May I please have permission?
Yes.
And is that, you said, how is BSV the only option to do this? What about all these other cryptocurrencies out there? There's so many. What about things like Litecoin or other forks of BTC from the old days? Digibyte. I mean, can't they just do it? I mean, isn't Digibyte and Litecoin a fork of the old BTC? I mean, I'm just wondering, help me understand what makes BSV so unique in that aspect.
Yeah, really good question. And again, all of these models are really built around Satoshi's insight and his genius in the development and launch of Bitcoin, and it's still running to this day as BSV. But some of those other platforms, for example, BTC. Let's just look at one reason why it's not possible through BTC. One of the reasons why it's not possible through BTC is because of the introduction and inclusion of, first of all, the SegWit and things like this, which change the nature of what a coin in a transaction actually looks like and how it's validated, et cetera. But also, removal of opcodes, that's another thing. But one other, classic change to how things were processed on that chain is that they use a model called replace by fee. So this would be the equivalent of you broadcasting a transaction again to a node pool, and then if it doesn't get picked up by the nodes because of their small block sizes, what you end up with is this artificial scarcity to have your information be included in the public ledger, right? Which in a way it sort of creates this it defeats the concept of public, right? Because it's like, oh, everybody's free to come over here and use my and eat at my public 5-star restaurant or something. It just costs $1,000 a head to get in, but it's public. You're definitely free to use it. It's not public, right? If there's these massive walls that keep the majority of people out of it. So the reality is that instead of just keeping it to an actual public network, they create this artificial kind of like gateway access to their own network. All information has to get passed by through them. And then if you send them some information and they don't really feel like acknowledging it, then maybe you can send some more the same information or even a different information. Just pay a little bit more. And they'll maybe take that one, right? This is like the equivalent of like, you're trying to get tickets to a concert, right? Supposedly it's a free concert, right? There's 30 seats there, like it's a public park. Yeah, but we're only doing it in this one location, and we have guards and bouncers there. And so they're going to sell you the scalp tickets to get in, right? And so what this creates is the perfect recipe for a bubble, right? Because now all of a sudden, in order to get your information in, okay, well, I want to make sure that my BTC gets sold, and I'm willing to pay $1,000 fee because I'm scalping this guy for $8,000, so I'll gladly pay $1,000 to whoever can take, this is the old world, right? This is what this network is trying to replace. And it's amazing how they wrap this concept of it being decentralized and this like forked tongue way to make it seem like an ordinary person is actually being protected by them ensuring that the process still goes through their gateways and their paywalls, et cetera. It's mind-boggling. But to answer your question about some of these other networks, first of all, there's some real problems with networks that develop and design around proof of stake, and there's some, potential legal liabilities that come with being a proof of stake, right? Because at the end of the day, you're really sort of sharing in a combined effort. Like, not very clear whether that passes the Howey test, which would determine whether or not something is a security or not. And you're really making profit off of the back of others, right? Like you're not really contributing anything to the network. You're not processing, any, you're not validating anything. All you're doing is just using your money to sit there and to siphon more money and more money and more money into your little money pool. And, eventually the problem is that eventually, this is like the equivalent of like, I live in Colorado, and I see the Colorado River going by us, and I see it going lower and lower and lower and lower, right? And so like, it's this idea of proof of stake is this like this, it's like you imagine that the Colorado River is like endless, like it's just an endless river that'll never dry up, right? But eventually, if you absorb all the money out of the system, right, through this proof of stake mechanic or whatever, like you end up with just a riverbed, a dry riverbed. Like, okay, you did it, you achieved, you broke the Tetris game, you got to the end screen, you have all the ETH in the world, like You know, like everyone else is locked out of your economy. Congratulations. You know, that is a model that fails just blanket. It just from the get-go fails. So really what you need to have is this model where you know, money is incentivized to move, but it isn't required to move. You know, like for example, like Roger Ver, he's a famous
Yeah.
BCH
Bitcoin Cash.
advocate, and he has great perspectives on a lot of this stuff, and he demonstrates a lot of times like, hey, you want me to send you $5? Well, guess what? It costs more than $5 on BTC to send it. So, you know, how am I supposed to send it to you if it costs more to send it to you? You know, so, and he demonstrates that concept really well, you know, and so you know, it's the same thing. You want money to be able to be moved someplace, not and it can be moved for very low amounts, right? Because then you aren't being basically like bullied into sort of like, you know, sending it in only the increments that are acceptable, et cetera, right? You know, if you need to send 10 cents, go ahead, send 10 cents, right? What you're doing is you're getting out of the way of innovation, and you're allowing true market discovery to take place in terms of you know, what people value. And so, you know, we're in some really innovative times. You know, as far as how BSV achieves it in ways that no other network can, the truth is that it really comes down to scalability. You know, so much of the security model and so much of the scalability really depends on these microtransactions. And I'm going to just use one quick example to demonstrate that. And this is something else that came from Dr. Wright. So again, like I have one source pretty much on
You're
all this
plagiarizing
material.
all his good secrets, huh? Go ahead.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, tell your kids that this was Satoshi, okay? But you know, one of the things that Dr. Wright said is that, okay, first of all, we have this concept of identity being firewalled from the network, right? And we use this example. I used an example in that conversation that you were talking about of the PO box, right? So if you're sending me something, let's say that you're sending me you know, something that I don't necessarily want people to know that I'm receiving, or something like that. Let's say it's some literature that certain people have deemed is inappropriate or something, or, you know, like especially in places where speaking out against the government is not allowed, right? We have a protected first right.
Censored
Not everybody
information.
does.
Right.
Yeah, sensitive information. So let's say that we are living in a place where sensitive information like that could theoretically jeopardize our health or our you know, you sending it to my address with my name written on the top of it, you know, and suddenly someone decides, I'm cutting this open, I want to see what it is. Right now, all of a sudden, both of us are in trouble because they're connecting this information back to our identities, right? Whereas if you're using a PO box, right, and mail person cuts the message or box open and sees, okay, this is propaganda, you know, against us. We don't permit this type of information. Where was this information going? PO Box 333, you know, Bermuda, you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, well, at least now that's not linked directly back to my person, right? They may be able to figure out through this, that, or the other that it was me, and maybe that's another chip that
You
has to
have
fall.
some protection though, like
Yeah, but I have some protection. Same way with blockchain. The blockchain addresses become almost like PO boxes. They obscure my identity, but you know, if I'm using that address to receive you know, trafficking, you know, illegal human trafficking funds, things like that, things that are out of bounds, you know,
then
then
that can be exposed through
that
court
can be exposed.
orders.
Yes, yes. And but the thing is that it would cost millions and millions of dollars to discover those types of things, et cetera.
However, it's still possible,
It's still possible.
which is good because that gives the person due process. Still, they still have to get a court order. I think that's the big concern that like a lot of people have had. Like Roger Ver, for example, I think is one of them. He wanted to have total privacy, right? He wanted to have invisibility. It seems like they had Monero, for example, where you can never ever find that person. And this is different, where it's like if a court comes in and says no, that is an absolutely illegal activity over there, give the guy due process, subpoena the records, come forward. They have to produce it. It's like a receipt.
Exactly. Exactly. And one of the ways that this could happen is, let's just say for the sake of discussion that I am participating in something like trafficking of, humans, human trafficking or something like this. I have a massive ring around the world, and but I'm leaving little evidence trails here and there, et cetera. And eventually, through the good work of people who are seeking to take these types of rings down, and also through the strength and courage of people who stand up to risk themselves, to expose some of this, to protect people that are become victims of this type of stuff. My I begin to be suspected of participating in this stuff, right? So maybe I'm being observed, or something like this, right? There's some vans that go by my house a couple times a day, et cetera. Anyway, long story short is that eventually it determines that, a warrant is issued, so they can go into my property now. They have the authority to do that. Now, this is, of course, constitutional in many respects, when it's just, oh, I don't like that guy, I'm just going to go into his house, and you have, there's a
Well, if
reason
there's a
why.
warrant, that's different.
Yeah. Yeah,
He
but if there's a
has,
warrant, there's just reason why you can be
yeah,
suspected that something really terrible is going down. Then it's a good thing that then that can get discovered. So now they go in and they seize items of mine as part of my evidence, as part of their evidence, right? So maybe some of what they don't know that I'm PO Box 333, right? They see that on the blockchain. Nobody's ever linked that back to me, but then they go in, they grab my computers and they realize, oh, this guy is PO Box 333. Now they can say, okay, well, we have, it's not, again, there's due process. So just because they found it on my computer doesn't mean it necessarily was me, right? But it's like all those things, all roads lead to Rome, right? You build up evidence eventually, and then you make a case. But once they've at least linked me to this potentially illicit address, like, now they can go back and go, oh, and it sent money here and it sent money there. And now let's at least look at those addresses, because who are they? Again, you find, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, right? When you
yeah.
go and you find another PO box, right?
It
But
sounds like that story. There's a video, it was on mainstream news, where a guy, he was the Bitcoin billionaire or millionaire. And he basically, like, he actually, I think that he might have confessed, but the feds had come in and questioned him. Or did you hear about this, where the guy had actually taken money off of a wallet a long time ago, maybe like 10 or 15 years ago? Did you hear about
yeah,
this one?
yeah,
And it
I
was
did just
missing
recently.
Bitcoin. And all of a sudden, this guy was super rich and he was flying all around the world, right? And
Yeah,
they were able to track it, after one
yeah.
of the
Well,
longest.
Craig calls it new wine in old bottles, right? Like this is a scenario that's been going on through all time, right? The difference is that with blockchain now we have this immutable, registry of this information where it can, like, for example, a lot of people like the metaphor of the coin shaving, back when, if you think about it, when you grab a quarter out of your pocket, a US quarter, they have those ridges along the sides. In fact, I think, the dimes have the ridges too. One of the reasons why they had those is because they used to be made out of silver, and
I actually have a silver quarter I
yeah, take
carry
a look
around
at
with
it.
me. It's real silver. I don't know if you
Yeah,
can see them. And the ridges on the side, I don't know if the camera picks it up or not. Maybe if I go like that. Anyway,
yeah,
yeah, they used to make these out of silver.
yeah.
This is a 1939.
Oh, beautiful.
They call
Yeah,
it junk silver.
they make a different sound for anyone that hasn't held a,
It's called junk silver.
yeah, junk silver. And they totally like hollow. Like, if you especially if you have two silver quarters and you clank them against each other, and listen to it, it's like one of the most beautiful sounds in the world, because it sounds like just like nothing's there, right? Because it's just such a pure material, and so light and so malleable, and yeah, I'm a big fan of that metal. But yeah, there used to be, that metal, whether or not it's formed into a quarter or whether it's just, melted down or cut in half. You can cut a silver quarter in half, and I guarantee it's probably worth more cut in half than it's worth as a 25-cent piece, right? So what people used to do, and they used to do in Roman times, is shave the edges of the coins, and then you get a little bit of gold, right, or a little bit of silver. So every time someone comes to your blacksmith shop to buy, the latest and greatest sword that you've made, you're shaving a little bit of your coin out off of it, and they're receiving less and less, even though it says it's a 25-cent piece. The reason why it's 25 cents is because it's referencing how much silver really is in that, and we've moved away from that for a long time, but so the idea is that this technology has had to mature of how to ensure that the coins have retained their provenance, that they haven't been shaved, right? Like this is a dilemma that goes back millennia. You know what I mean? People have always been trying to figure out, how do we keep track of this base unit that really forms, the brain. They say the brain is like, just a giant net of neurons, and the neurons, they fire, right? So they fire information, and when they fire, it's signals, right? It's pulses and information. Well, likewise, if you imagine our society and our culture as like a brain, right? We tend to, like, we congregate around towns and locations, and we have our little communities, we form these pockets, but money is like the firing of the neurons. It's how we as a culture exchange information with each other, and how we determine validity of information, and it just so happens that we sort of, are at a dead end in some regards to how we have built that system. Now it becomes almost more, you become more incentivized to try to steal people's information, to try to lie to people, right? Like you can, the fabric, the underpinnings of the society are getting to experience almost like a form of rot. And that happens when bad actions become incentivized. The bad actions have always been incentivized, right? There's always been powerful people that do terrible things and stuff like that. So I'm not trying to say that only in our current times have we had that, but really, we have this day and age where we almost have nothing left. We're just like, we're seeing ourselves in the mirror as just basically like, Hunter Thompson once said, we're like used car salesmen. We're all just used car salesmen, just trying to convince each other of the next rift or grift, excuse me. And blockchain comes along at the perfect time, really, as the medicine for that. And oftentimes what the medicine is like activity, right? It's like, if you end up like, experiencing like, your health is low, your energy is low, what is some of the best ways to combat that? The best ways are to, I know you're a big health guy, so you get out there, you get some sunshine, do some exercise, stimulate your body, stimulate your brain, see something new, break out of your mold, of your shell, etc., right? And we can't do that as a species if we aren't actively exchanging with each other. We can't do that as a society. The money needs to be freely moving between all of us, so we can say, we can figure out, where is the rot? Where are our best ideas coming from? How do we encourage people to get out there and to contribute? And, one of the things that you learn from Dr. Wright is the true value of work, that work is its own reward. And that is something that, it's like, it's like the thing that your parents tell you, or like your dad's told you, like you're like, yeah, whatever, that's such terrible advice. And then, I loved the Mark Twain quote where he said something to the effect of, when I was 17, my dad was an idiot, and when I was 22, he was a genius, and I always wondered how he learned so much in 5 years. But the reality is that work is its own reward, right? Like when the society is out there working, contributing, building, innovating, putting its capital to use, not storing it underneath the pillow, underneath the mattress, and siphoning it off like some proof of stake, fantasy world of Vitalics, but really going back into the economy and stimulating it so that more and more, uh, great ideas can be brought to the market. That's where I think Craig sees the best potential in humanity delivering on its promise, which I think is quite great.
This is beautiful, beautiful, Brett. I greatly appreciate it. We've got to wrap up and do this again here real soon. Hopefully you're open to coming back. And you know, where can people learn more about like BSV Association, and where can they go for that?
Yeah. So check us out at bsvblockchain.org. You can also email me directly, brett.banfe, Brett Banfe, at bsvblockchain.org. And I'll just tell you that, you know, I described a little bit about my introduction to this space. I learned about it through Dr. Wright, through his trials, seeing his defense, etc. I found him to be fascinating. I really loved his ideas. I wanted to get in and explore them more, but I didn't, you know, I love exploring theoretical ideas. Don't get me wrong. That's wonderful. I love that. But exploring how they actually translate into the real world, how they translate to a network that not only can do these things in, you know, a thought bubble or something like that, but can actually see the, you know, the rubber meet the road. You know, that's what's being developed and built right now by the BSV Association. And I'm so thankful and privileged to be a part of it. You know, I got involved with this organization just through literally reaching out cold to some of my heroes in this space, people like Connor Murray, people like Kurt Wooker Jr., people like Xiaowei Liu, your good friend from Script, who's doing amazing work.
You know, this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but I totally forgot. You know, I actually want to ask you. I might as well do it. You know, I forgot you're part of the BS. I don't know why I didn't think of this before. I submitted a proposal to come and host a event at the London blockchain with the BSV Association post trial. And somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, please fill out this form and submit something to where you could host a, you know, like an event there, you know, the group at the event." And so I did that. I made a video. I did all the paperwork, and I'm waiting to hear back. I got my fingers crossed. I hope I make it. So if you have any pull, please, I'm putting it out there. So I would love to.
I do have some polls. So
My thing is that I proposed, I wrote up a proposal and I said, after the trial, it'll be perfect timing. Hopefully the trial will be over, that we invite the Copa lawyers, and then we invite the lawyers for Craig Wright, and we do a recap. And if I would be awesome. I doubt they would come, but maybe. If not, we'll just do it with whoever else wants to participate and recap on what happened and what it means.
Yeah, and the thing is that, you know, we you know, at the end of the day, we're talking about ideas that go beyond just the you and the I. You know, these are really important ideas that spell out some of what we're going to be doing for the next 100 years, 200 years, etc. You know, so it's really important for us to have these spirited discussions where maybe there's differences of opinion and there's conflicting viewpoints, you know, but at the end of the day, we have we you know, build a culture of accountability to each other, and you know, that's something that's important. You know, if we want to live in a free world, you know, it means that we have to be accountable, right? You know, no one wants to live in King Brett Banfe's imaginary palace, you know, despite how brilliant I think I am, you know. There's no way whatsoever that I could ever you know, source the amount of global intelligence that we can do together. And you know, that's the value of a small world network. So, you know, I invite everyone to participate with bsvblockchain.org. I really would love to see that discussion, because I want to see you know, people it's just like that same
sport, back to where you
that
started with sportsmanship. That's
yeah,
exactly what I think. I would love to be, you know, I want to host it, and I want to ask the questions. And you got the two guys who are in the ring fighting in the trials, or their law firm. They come in, shake hands, may the best man win. What happened? Like, let's recap. Like, that would be such a joy, and it would be great sportsmanship. You know, even if Craig wins, lose, or draw, you know, I would love to see that perspective. So hopefully I'm putting putting my message out there, and you've got some pull, and maybe it can come together. They've got all the paperwork. I'm just waiting for the approval. Supposedly, I don't know what the.
Perfect. Well, I'm really looking forward to, you're doing such a great job. I really
Thank
look
you.
forward to recaps all the time. And it's such a pleasure, privilege, and honor to be on your show and to just talk about these ideas. They're fun, and I really appreciate being on your show.
Thank you, Brett. It's really my honor. I enjoy learning from you a lot. I'm soaking it all up. So let's do this again sometime, and I'll go ahead and end the recording there, and I'll see you at the top.